welcome all our listeners to Globespan Television, and we welcome Mr. Nigel Hughes, a prominent lawyer in Georgetown, Guyana. Now, we are having some internet problems, so you'll be unable to see me live, but I'm sure you'll be able to see Mr. Hughes live. Our guest tonight is, as I said, is Mr. Hughes, and we must thank Noir Singh for making this program available, Devin Bissoon and Ryan Gobin, our technical directors. Now, we can be seen on Globespan and YouTube as well. The views expressed tonight by our guests do not reflect those of the staff or management of Globespan Television. So once again, we thank you and good night to all our listeners across Guyana, the Caribbean, and around the world. Good night, Mr. Hughes. Welcome to the program.
Good evening, Dr. Rose. Thank you very much for having me on your program.
Now, Mr. Hughes, I want to deal with the legal system first, if you don't mind. As you know, there are lots of backlog cases in the system, and the government recently presented appointed new justices. I think 7 of the 10 are female. But do you think that will ease the backlog?
I think it will have a tremendous impact on the backlog. All of the judges are young. Most of them have, about half of them have judicial experience sitting at the bench. So I think they're familiar with the workings of having to adjudicate. So I certainly think it would have an impact both on the civil and the criminal backlog.
Okay, thanks for that. Now, the legal system, as you know, have a number of different judges across the spectrum. But we have the Chancellor and the Chief Justice, and they've been acting for the past, I think, 4 or 5 years. Why is that so?
Well, I think you know the answer to that. The answer to that is that the political leadership of this country cannot get together to arrive at a consensus on who should be Chancellor and who should be Chief Justice. And so as a consequence, not only does the legal system suffer, but the country suffers.
And as all Guyanese know, and I think the Caribbean as well, you're one of the most prominent lawyers in Guyana. And for years now, you have been recommended, you have been touted, everything has been put in place for you to become a senior counsel. But you have not been given that title. Again, why is that so?
Well, first of all, I don't know if I'm one of the most prominent lawyers in Guyana. I'm probably one of the longer practicing lawyers in Guyana. I can't speak to the reasons why the president or presidents would not have appointed me. I'm not sure that I necessarily cut muster. So you're assuming that I cut muster, and I certainly do not wish to be considered for appointment anyway. So I think that puts paid to that issue.
Okay. Now, I know you're being very modest in that, but I still believe you're one of the most prominent lawyers. You go to Essequibo, everyone knows about Nigel Hughes. The Marara, that's a name, recognition. Berbice, the quarantine is the same thing. Now, again, I will repeat, you're probably one of the longest practicing lawyers and probably most prominent lawyer, one of the most prominent lawyers in the country.
I'm not one of the longest practicing. I've been practicing for a long time, but not the longest. There are people who are
among the longest. Yeah. Among the longest.
I'm not close to 50 years yet, but getting there.
Okay. Now, you have been a very successful lawyer too, and I'm saying to you, the country over knows this. Why would you leave a successful legal career to go into politics?
Sounds as if you're trying to dissuade me. You probably are making a lot of good sense. I think, as you probably know, I have been involved in politics before. I departed from politics in 2016. I believe the country is at a stage where things are precariously perched, and I do believe at some stage I would like to offer myself for service to the country. And I think it's a combination of those factors that led to me re-entering politics.
A lot of my friends, you have become the leader of the AFC at the last conference or congress or whatever you call it.
Conference.
And a lot of my, pardon me?
Conference. Congress is the People's
Conference.
National. Yeah, we have a
right.
conference.
And a lot of my friends have been telling me, and these are Indo and Afro-Guyanese, that they're thinking seriously of rejoining the AFC because it has got a brand new leadership under a vibrant Nigel Hughes. Now, you have adopted the motto, I think, better must come. How would you make sure that that happens in Guyana?
I've had that motto for a long time. Since I first entered politics, I have had that motto. Well, there's nothing such as certainty in politics. All I can say is, if and when elected, I and the party, or combination of entities that form the government, will have to be committed to ensuring that the lives of all Guyanese, are improved, that we go as far as is possible, humanly possible, to eliminate poverty, and that we go as far as is possible again to make sure that we have equality, equal opportunity, and a fair and equitable distribution both of the opportunities and the wealth of the country.
Good. Now, you've taken over the leadership, as I said, of the AFC, and the party, looking at the polls, it's about 5, 6, 7%. Even the election is held today, that means they'll get probably 2 seats, 3 seats. But do you intend to work on improving that? And how you intend to do that?
Well, I haven't seen any of the recent polls, so I can't really say that I am aware that we would get 2 to 3% or 5% or we'd get 2 seats. But certainly I am committed to not only building out the strength of the party, but deepening that strength. We are going to be reaching out across the country, first of all, to listen to what the citizens in all regions have to say and what their views are and what the future should be. And after we've got their views, we have some of our own, and we have plans for the development of the country. I'm not sure if you heard part of my address when I accepted the leadership, but I did identify a couple of key areas there. But I do want to say to you, Dr. Rose, before we start that, one of the things we're going to have is a review of the performance of the Alliance for Change going into the going into the 2015 election, our performance while in office with the People's National Congress between 2015 and 2020, and the reasons why we are out of office today. Because I believe that unless you examine what it is you did wrong, what were your missteps, what were the things that work, you really wouldn't get a good guide as to what you should be doing in the future. So those are some of the items on our agenda for change.
I just got a message here from someone who said that you're very good at explaining yourselves. You have a good command of the English language and a good command of words. Having said that, the person told me, they said you should be the consensus candidate for APNU AFC. But I think you have stated that there'll be no rush to become a partner with the APNU or the PNC in the next election. Why?
Well, I think what I said before, and forgive me for having to repeat it, is first of all, the Alliance for Change has to, it's got to build its own strength out. And like I said, we have to conduct a re-examination of what happened when we were in partnership with another political party, whether that was necessarily the best course of action, and to identify where the steps and missteps are. At the present moment, no indication of when the elections are going to be. We know they're constitutionally due by the end of next year, and therefore at this point in time, I think it's the view of the executive of the Alliance for Change and my view that we need to concentrate on building the strengths of the Alliance for Change. Like you say, we are 2 to 5%. We want to really increase that significantly.
Now, you spoke about being a consensus candidate.
No, I did not.
Mr. Norton?
No, perhaps I want to correct that. I said that one of the pathways to success is attempting to identify a consensus candidate, not just for the APNU AFC, but for a broad cross-section of certainly political parties and major civil society groups. So that's specifically what I said. So I just want you to be clear that anything other than that wasn't uttered by me.
Now, Mr. Norton came out and said that any consensus candidate must come from within the PNC, which is the largest opposition party. This means that he automatically ruled you out. But if the people put pressure on him and you become the consensus candidate for APNU AFC, would you accept?
Well, I think before I can answer that question, first of all, I think we have to recognize that political parties generally have a right to speak about what their position is. Mr. Norton has articulated what the People's National Congress's position is on consensus candidate. I don't know that pressure can be brought to bear on him. I think he is very clear that he enjoys the majority support in that political institution, and they have given him a mandate that he should be the candidate, and if he's not the candidate, that the candidate should come from the People's National Congress. I can't speak to that process. But the leader having said that, it's difficult to imagine in what scenario the People's National Congress would end up with a consensus candidate outside of their party. What I can say is that what the Alliance for Change intends to do is to meet with all the other parliamentary parties, as well as those parties that are not in parliament. We intend to meet with the private sector, the trade unions, the religious bodies, a very broad cross-section of the Guyanese public, to get a sense of what, what is in the best interest of Guyana. And I think that's perhaps what I'd like to emphasize, that the whole concept of consensus candidate is premised on what may be in the best interest of Guyana. And I certainly can't say that any particular individual, including myself, is necessarily a presumptive candidate, but there are a lot of people out there, I think, that would cut mustard.
Now forgive me if you, I think I might be coming on now live.
Yeah, I'm
but if one of the
I don't wish to interrupt you, but I suspect that your audience would like to see a little bit more of you. We're seeing the backdrop of you, which I don't think is necessarily reflective of you, and you may want to consider adjusting your camera.
Okay, sorry about that. One of our listeners, let me just close this television, this screen off. Okay. One of the listeners have sent me a question.
Oh, sorry, I was hearing a bit of an echo. Sorry. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, there's an eco system there, Devin.
I think it has improved. You're no longer echoing.
Okay. One of our listeners, and forgive me if you may, have sent me a question. What a consensus candidate means to you? Can you explain that to our listeners?
Okay, so there's no precedent in Guyana that I'm aware of in our political history since independence that has facilitated the identification of a consensus candidate. So I'm sure different people have different interpretations of what that means. For me personally, a consensus candidate would be a candidate identified by a grouping, a body of whether political parties or civil society or a combination of both, that have gotten together, they have agreed upon a particular program, they have agreed upon a particular manifesto, and they have identified the person they think is best positioned to advance that manifesto, that program, and articulate an agreed upon vision for the future. That is what I think a consensus candidate looks like, as opposed to where you have two political entities, as we did on the last occasion, APNU and the AFC, who identify who their respective leaders should be and who the deputy leader should be.
As you know, in 2011, the AFC under the leadership, I think, of Cameron Ramtatan, held the balance of power. I think that with 7 seats. Could you think the AFC could repeat that performance under your leadership?
I certainly think that the Alliance for Change stands a very good chance of repeating and perhaps improving its performance than it did in 2011. And yes, if that means holding the balance of power in Guyana, yes, I think we've got a pretty fair shot at doing just that.
And if the AFC has a balance of power, what would the AFC do? Which party would the AFC support based on their policies, or you will just support a party that you wanted to support?
No, I think, first of all, our approach to government, if we were placed in the position where we were able to hold that level of influence and sway and leverage, would be concentrated on, first of all, what's in the best interest of Guyana. We'd probably take it topic by topic, issue by issue, as opposed to giving a particular political party our conditional or absolute support. I certainly believe that what is most important for Guyana is that we identify a plan, particularly an economic plan, a plan for education, a plan to address poverty, that would address those issues in Guyana. And with that being our focus, we would attempt to identify what would be the best pathway forward for the country. So I certainly don't think it's going to be a case where we undertake or enter into some sort of political arrangement in which we give unconditional support to a particular party, unless, of course, during the course of the negotiations, we arrive at a common plan and a common methodology for enforcing the commitments that we would have given to the people of Guyana.
You know, there was a prime minister in, I think, it was St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Yeah,
Mr. Mitchell.
Yeah.
Right. The two, I think the other 15-seat parliament, and you must have a majority to form the government, which means that you must have 8 seats. And I think he broke away from, I think it's Joshua's party, and formed his own party, and he gained 1 seat. Joshua offered him to be the finance minister. He turned it down. He says, I want to be the prime minister. The other opposition, or the other candidate, offered him to be the same thing, and he turned it down. And he ended up being the prime minister. And he went on and won, I think, 4 elections after that with his party, because they called him if I'm not mistaken, the Rumshot prime minister, because what I read, he told the secretary, clear my desk, don't make no appointments after 1 o'clock in the afternoon for me. And he would go and visit the people in all the rural areas, all the rum shops, everything else, and sit down and talk with them and try to solve all the problems. And he won 4 elections after that. Having said that, given the opportunity that you hold the balance of power in your hands, would you make such demands?
No, I think the first thing we'd have to do, Dr. Rose, is examine what the Guyana political architecture permits. Unlike St. Vincent and Grenadines, which has a first-past-the-post system, in Guyana we have a PR system, but more importantly, the Constitution in Guyana says the party that gets the most votes, or the plurality of the votes, not necessarily a majority, but gets the plurality of the votes, gets the presidency. So if you had a split of 34, 33, 33, then the party that got 34% of the votes gets the presidency automatically. Now, the question of political stability would be an obvious consequence if you've only got 34% of the vote. But I don't think in a situation like that, unless that person or the head of the list for that political party stepped down and allowed the party that held the balance of power to have their candidate go up, which I think is highly unlikely. I don't think that can happen in our particular political situation. So I know Mr. James Mitchell did that in St. Vincent, and he was very successful going forward. But we have a slightly different set of constitutional architecture.
Okay, well said. Now, if the AFC holds the balance of power and happen to decide to call a no confidence motion based on policies that they don't like from the PPC government, would you support the AFC?
That's a highly...
The APMU.
Yeah, well, that's a very highly speculative question for this reason. One is, motions of no confidence are normally driven by some form of political discontent or malcontent, or there's a particular policy that is being attempted by the ruling party that one has strenuous objections to. So I couldn't say to you in absolute terms, and certainly I don't think most politicians will say to you in absolute terms, that we would necessarily support that vote. It depends on what the political context is, what the specific issue is, what the impact on Guyana is at the time. We hope that whenever we do vote to support a no confidence vote, it's in the best interest of the country.
I want to turn to the teachers' strike. The teachers went on strike on 2 occasions for a total of 70 days. And Justice Kissun ruled that the teachers' strike were legitimate because the government refused to negotiate with the Guyana Teachers Union, the GTU. Do you think Justice Kissun ruling was correct?
Well, I want if you would permit me an observation. I think it must be less
Go
than
ahead.
It was less than an hour after Justice Kissun ruled that the Honorable Attorney General of Guyana decided not only to attack the judgment, but to attack the judge. I think he described the decision as vacuous. To say that that was an unfortunate statement is an understatement. And I think it is most, I don't know how I put this kindly. I think, let me just say, it's most unfortunate that the leader of the bar, so to speak, would think it appropriate to attack a sitting judge who clearly had taken considerable time to deliver a judgment. The system provides for redress if you are unhappy with a decision. And if you're unhappy with the decision of the Court of Appeal, it provides an avenue for redress thereafter. There is absolutely no justification for personally attacking a judge, attacking his judgment in terms that are unhelpful. And all that does is erode confidence in the entire system, including the lawyers. Because people who are not necessarily lawyers are going to adopt the position and adopt the conduct that they think it is acceptable to abuse a judge just because you are unhappy with the decision he ruled. Every single day, every single lawyer in this country goes to court knowing fully well that he or she may prevail or may not prevail. It certainly is not acceptable in any circumstances. Even if you think for some reason the decision is not consistent with the law, to attack the judge, and certainly not acceptable to do that personally. What I would say in relation to the judgment of Justice Kissun, because it is under appeal, because it has attracted so much media attention, I don't think it's appropriate for me at this stage to make any comment on that judgment, because it will only add to the already immense pressure that one has placed on the Court of Appeal. And unfortunately, in our society, we don't see past a lot of very basic things. And I don't wish to be contributing to that. So forgive me for not wanting to comment on Justice Kissun's decision. What I will say is Justice Kissun has a long history. He's a young judge and has a long history of very reasoned decisions. And in the circumstances, I believe his antecedents will speak for him.
Dr. Rose, can you unmute on Skype?
Are you hearing me now?
Yes.
You hearing me, Mr. Hughes?
I certainly am. Yes, yes, I am.
Okay. Great. Now
I'm seeing a rather poor image of you, and I'm not sure you want
I
to
know.
be out. I don't. Yeah, much better. And you have a very interesting backdrop.
I know. I don't know where it came from, but it's okay. So, do you think teachers in Guyana are being treated fairly? And how would an AFC government treat teachers? Would they increase the salary? or doubling the salary? What do you think salary teachers, starting salary for teachers?
Well, I want to start off by saying this, and the Alliance for Change has made this clear, and I certainly attempted to articulate this position last week, Saturday, when I accepted. We believe that there are 5 areas in which all political parties, and both those in Parliament and out of Parliament, should agree on a 10 to 15-year plan. Those 5 areas are the economy, education, foreign affairs, health, and poverty. In relation specifically to education, we would like to rely on what the data is suggesting, and this is the official data. If the official data says that close to 50% of our students are dropping out of school long before they get to CXC or at whatever stage they exit school, it means we have an absolute crisis bordering on a disaster in the educational system. I believe there needs to be a complete overhaul of the educational system for the foreseeable, well, certainly for the next 10 to 15 years, and we need to do that now. So a couple of things are happening. We are going to double our production of oil over the next 5 years. It means that the job market is going to have specific demands. The job market is going to demand skilled and semi-skilled labor. That's a fact. Everybody says so. And therefore, the output from our educational system must be able to deliver skilled and semi-skilled workers in specific areas. If half of our students are dropping out of school today, it means half of those students will not be in a position to fill either category of the demand for labor going forward, which means that they are going to be confined or restricted to lower end jobs in a society in which they are nationals. It also means that the demand for skilled and unskilled labor in an oil economy will have to be filled from somewhere else. It's going to be filled by people who don't live in Guyana, or people who are not Guyanese and live outside. So that has an impact on Guyana. So you're going to have a lot of semi-skilled and skilled workers coming from elsewhere, and we haven't even agreed a migration policy or immigration policy, and they are going to be taking the better paying jobs. So the 50% of students that are coming out of school now are now going to be, may I say, restricted from any form of social and economic development simply because of their lack of qualifications. That is begging for a disaster to happen here. There's going to be social unrest. There's going to be all forms of unrest. And therefore, unless we right now, if 50% are falling out of the system, immediately begin training programs that allow these students who are falling through the cracks to be able to get skills that will allow them to participate in the modern economy in Guyana, we are going to be in a crisis situation, which is going to be ripe for exploitation by perhaps the more extremist elements in our society. So to answer your question, one of the proposals we have for education in terms of the remuneration for teachers is this. Very few schools are teaching the curricula within the academic year. And the reason for that is teachers are so generally underpaid that they have to teach extra lessons just to make it. And that is because they're trying to find a form of economic security. A couple of basic things: housing, transportation, and ability to have some disposable income. Guyana has no shortage of land. Our proposal is that you develop very middle to upper scale neighborhoods. You give teachers a 30-year mortgage. You give them duty free, and you ensure that their salaries are comparable to other countries that are in the same circumstances. In return for that, you say to the teachers, look, you need to concentrate on one thing. You have to meet these targets. 80 and 90% of the people that graduate in any particular cohort have to be within the top 25 percentile of the grades available in that particular cohort. And those are the benchmarks you have to meet. you have to teach the curricula to all students within the academic year. And if you fail to do that, the mortgage that you get that is 2 points below commercial rates, the 30-year mortgage that you get will now be placed in jeopardy. Your duty-free will be placed in jeopardy. And so we say to teachers, please go ahead, dedicate your life to teaching our students so that what comes out of school across the board is a much better product, much better qualified, fully skilled, and fully capable of addressing the demands from the labor force in Guyana. You'll have to expand, obviously, vocational training and other aspects of educational training, and we have to study what our economy is going to demand.
The AFC, under its previous leadership and its founders, Ms. Sheila Holder, the late Sheila Holder, Raphael Trotman, Cameron Ramjatan, and maybe you yourself and others, your wife Kathy and everything else, was founded on the principle of liberal democracy. Is the AFC a liberal democratic party?
I'm obviously tempted to ask you what you mean by a liberal democratic party.
They said it.
No, I appreciate that. What I would say to you is the focus of the Alliance for Change, insofar as I'm in a position to attempt to influence it, is one in which its concentration is on the development of our human resources. That is the primary objective of what we stand for. The second one is we believe that we as a party have to advocate policies that are fiscally responsible. You can't go on a spending spree without being responsible for managing the economy, protecting our investments, ensuring that we have long-term plans so that we send the appropriate signal to our investors. We can't continue to distribute wealth if we're not generating it and we're not attracting investment. So it's human capital development coupled with fiscal responsibility, and then of course we can go into the details of what some of those plans look like.
Now, if you don't mind, I have another question from one of our listeners.
It's your program, sir.
Thanks. And she's saying that the AFC always speak about equality and fairness, gender equality and fairness. And it means gender equality and fairness in the workplace and in all other areas. And there's a question, President, if that is not the case presently in Guyana, the question the person asked me to ask you, what would a President Hughes do in order to make gender equality in the workplace and in all other areas fair to everyone?
Well, a couple of things. One is that it is my intention that any cabinet that I have the privilege of heading would have 50% of its ministers as female. That's demonstrative, and I understand people can say, well, it's easy to do that, but that does not necessarily result in the deep change that is needed throughout the economy and throughout the business sector. Secondly, I would ensure that we have policies that reward businesses, that reward employers, that reward the people who are in the civil service, that reward people who are in the private sector, who attempt to rebalance the leadership at all levels of their enterprises. So that can be done by tax incentives, that can be done by other incentives, fiscal incentives, to make sure that we afford women the opportunity to operate on the same basis upon which men do, and that percentage is reflected. I think in some areas that has already been achieved, because if you look at the judiciary, if you look at the legal profession, more women are coming into the legal profession and have been coming into the legal profession for more than a decade. It is no longer a male bastion. We have a female chancellor, female chief justice, and female, I believe the acting chief magistrate is also female. We have had female presidents of the bar. We have a very vibrant Guyana Association of Women Lawyers. But that's just to show that there are areas in which I think that level of success has been achieved. I think also in terms of business, one can provide incentives, not only for loans, but for the development of small, medium, and large-scale enterprises in which not only equity, but the management is genuinely headed by females, or that there is an equality in terms of the look of the development of those companies.
Folks, you're listening to Globespan Television. Our guest tonight is Mr. Nigel Yule, a prominent lawyer, I will say it even though you don't like that topic, and the leader of the AFC, Alliance for Change in Guyana. I have another question from our listeners. My listeners are not allowing me to ask my own questions. They're saying that the cost of living is killing me. I can't make ends meet at all. I'm doing 2 jobs. I have 4 kids. I'm a single mother, and still I'm struggling. What would you recommend to the government to do in order to ease the pain on us?
Right. So I thank your listener for that question. The first thing we would have to do is you'd have to examine why the cost of living is as pernicious as it is, and what are the factors that are driving that. There are many things that are driving that, but this is just a few of them. I'm by no means an economist, but I certainly have a few ideas. If you look at all the large projects in Guyana, the hotels that are being built, a lot of the new construction for the highways, the infrastructure development, all necessary, but most of them demand heavy foreign currency inputs. So concrete is not produced in Guyana, and the demand for aggregate has now resulted in the importation of a lot of aggregate. So when you have a $2 billion project, or you have a gas to shore project that's going to eat up a lot of concrete in the initial stages, it means local people are going to go to the banks to buy foreign currency to pay for cement. That puts a lot of pressure on the foreign currency. We have not seen significant variations upwards or downwards in the foreign currency, which means that currency is being artificially kept where it is. Now, in addition to that, you have a lot of money coming into the country and circulating in the country. And therefore, when you come to, let's take your sort of typical market basket, people believe it's not that the cost of production has gone up, the cost of electricity hasn't gone up, but the cost of fruits, vegetables, meat, chicken, everything else is going up. And it's not going up because the foreign exchange rate is suddenly changed. It's going up because people now find that they can get a better price for their products. So for example, if I'm a large purchaser of fruits and vegetables because I run an offshore company and I have to feed people on the various FPSOs, and I'm prepared to go into the market and pay, let's say, $4,000 a pumpkin, when pumpkins were $2,500 before, it means most of the market vendors are going to say, yay, I can get $4,000 a pumpkin, and therefore they're going to charge $4,000 a pumpkin, because that's just what the marketplace does. Unfortunately, for the rest of the society who want to purchase pumpkins, they either buy it at 4% at $4,000, or they settle for something else. And therefore, the value of their dollar, particularly where they're on fixed salaries, is leading to this awful increase in the cost of living. Now, that's a real problem. And if that is not addressed in a long-term measure, as opposed to, just injecting more foreign currency in the system, which is going to be very difficult, you're going to have this problem. So we now have to decide how it is we are going to structure the development projects. Because once you have a big demand for foreign currency in a lot of these projects, it's going to put pressure. Your foreign currency is going to leave the country. People who want it for regular businesses are not going to get it. They're going to be further down the queue. The fact that you've got a lot of large purchases in the market competing with the smaller purchases, that's going to drive prices up. And there are a series of other measures. Now, this is part of what is required in managing a rapidly developing economy with those consequences, where you're trying to avoid any of the social maladies that are likely to confront you. And that's why we have said specifically, let's look at the future of the country for 10 to 15 years. That transcends electoral cycles. And let's agree some fundamentals so that we can make sure that our people don't have to go through this cost of living crisis, which invariably forces them to do things they would not otherwise have considered. And we can only do that if we are mature in our approach, if we get past the political differences, and we are committed to a better Guyana on the long term.
Folks, that's a well-put cost effect and analysis of the cost of living effect. Well said, Mr. Yu. I have
Very kind, thank you.
Someone sent me a list of things here, and I don't know how to start to tell you this, but here are they. They said they've seen a secret document or a paper from the PNC. I don't know how true it is, which states that in sometime in the future, the PNC will make the following announcements. They will increase old age pension from the current, I think, what, $36,000 to $65,000. They will, the Because We Care program from $45,000 to $60,000. Income tax threshold increased to $120,000. Starting salaries for nurses, teachers, police officers, public servants, civil servants in general, $160,000. And hear this. They said because we have an abundance of our resources, they will share to the 310 households in Guyana at least $500,000 Guyana dollars at each Christmas time annually. And they're asking now, the final part of it, that all senior citizens be exempted from VAT, water, and electricity bills. Would the AFC support such a program?
Well,
I can go over the list if you want.
No. I remember the list very carefully, and I'll take it in parts. One, I did say to you fiscal responsibility.
Right.
I can't say to you, if you suddenly move salaries up to $160,000 in a vacuum without examining the economic indicators, that necessarily is where we should be going. I believe if we have an agreed, or in the case of the AFC, if the people that advise us on the economy say that that sort of increase can be afforded without any significant disruption, either to the cost of living, to all the other sort of tangential impacts. So for example, once you start pushing it up to 160, the private sector have to come up to match it. That pushes up the cost of production in Guyana. And other than oil, which is really an extractive industry, it means that Guyana perhaps may not be as competitive in the other areas in which we have to export. So agriculture, if the impact on that is that it pushes up the cost of production of rice, if the impact of that kind of rapid increase is that it pushes up the cost of any of the non-traditional products that we export, it means that our prices, the prices at which we sell our manufactured or value-added products overseas, is going to go up, and it's not going to be competitive. We have come from an economy which has never been productive. If you think of sugar, the only reason we had sugar up to 10, 15 years ago was because we had a protected market. So we don't necessarily have the history of producing world-class products at current world prices. Other than El Dorado rum, which is a very, very successful product, we don't have on a larger scale of bauxite, whatever industry. So we have to be very careful about the impact of these demands. And the other thing is this: if you're going to push salaries up to $160,000, and I don't want to be mistaken for a second as saying that I'm against it, but if you push it up there, the question is there going to be the attendant inflationary practice? Because the first thing all the people who own supermarkets and are retailing, they're going to say, okay, people got more disposable income, up go my prices to match that, because they're going to want to sell their product at some ridiculous rate. The pumpkin example I gave you, a pumpkin will now go to $8,000. It doesn't mean that the input, the cost of producing that pumpkin has gone up, but the way the market operates, people take advantage of it. And so that's why you've got to be fiscally responsible. Now, there are a couple of areas that you mentioned that are particularly easy, which I agree. I think pension, old age pension, removal of that, those are easy things to do. We could remove that for what we define as old age people. So that's easy. But again, that's why I think it is important that we have an overarching economic plan that make sure that the salaries that are paid are relative to cost of living, that afford people more disposable income without pushing everything through the roof. Because remember, at the end of the day, we remain essentially a one-product economy. Other than gold, it's oil. We need to diversify that economy in the next 10 to 15 years. And the reason I say that is multifaceted. One, we're not sure what's going to happen, where oil is going to be in the world market in 10 to 15 years. So I can understand why there's a drive to produce as much oil. Two, if there is a regime change in Venezuela, and there's likely to be a regime change in the next 10 to 15 years, it's going to happen. Regimes don't, Russia has defied that, but let's say there is a regime change in Venezuela. One of the consequences of that is going to be the hostility that we currently see from the United States government to the government in Venezuela is going to change. If Venezuela elects a right-wing government that is very pro-American, the American policy, of course, is going to change. Now, the consequence of that is this. Venezuela has far more oil resources than Guyana. It has an infinitely larger population than Guyana. And therefore, when Washington looks at what is in their best interest, if you have a Guyana, less than 1 million people, maybe 1.5 million people, militarily not capable very much, and you have a Venezuela with 24, 26 million people, government that is favorable to America, Venezuela is going to have far more influence and sway in Washington and Guyana. And what's the consequence of that? The border that we have on the west, which we are trying to protect, may not become of such significant interest to our good friends in Washington. And so we need to be able to diversify our economy and ensure that we are in a position to protect all our borders, irrespective of what happens in Venezuela. So that would be my response, extended as it may be, to your question.
What about giving each household $500,000 each year at Christmas time? Dr. Clive Thomas says $1 million, but this person is saying
$500,000.
$500,000.
Okay, the Alliance for Change, certainly, in my acceptance speech, said that we are in favor of direct transfers. Direct transfers can come at any time. You can have a single payment at the end of the year. You may have 4 quarterly payments. Depends on what the data says as the most appropriate time and manner in which you will deliver direct payments. I understand that people naturally would think, okay, you got a direct payment at Christmas, but that may not the data may not necessarily say that you get a single payment at Christmas. I am certainly in favor of direct payments, but again, one has to be fiscally responsible. And in the overall arching economic plan, we first have to decide what percentage of our budget we are going to allocate to direct transfers. So for me to say in July 2024 that it's going to be $500,000 or $1 million a year, in the absence of being advised about the impact of such payments on the economy, I think from where I stand would be slightly less than responsible from our perspective. But I certainly am 100% in favor of direct payments, but not only because of the amount, but because it removes from the political class the ability to run around pretending they're kings, giving out discretionary payments when they want it, saying to you, oh, you didn't get it last year or the last government, then give it to you, here it is. We need to get past this sort of petty politics and protect it by legislation, and say that if we want to limit it to whatever percentage of the GDP or the budget, we say this percentage will always be directly transferable to every citizen of the country, whatever, over the age of 18 or whatever criteria we use.
In Guyana, as you know, the suicide rate is very high, as well as traffic accidents, traffic deaths. How would an AFC government address those problems?
In the case of suicide, we have to, again, we got to be driven by the data and the information. I know they certainly see, in the old days, there used to be a concentration in certain communities for suicide, but we would need to have the specialists, the psychologists, the psychiatrists say to us what it is or what are the primary triggers that lead to suicide, because you can't address a problem unless you've got the underlying data. Anything that I say would only be speculative or rhetorical, and both of those are dangerous bases upon which to craft a policy to deal with suicide. I think we need to go to our psychiatrists or sociologists or psychologists and let them guide us in a data-based analysis about the key triggers for suicide, and then let us allocate the resources to them. So I do want to make this point. If there is a concentration of suicides, let's say in Adelphi, in Kanji, and I'm not saying there is, we would have to allocate more resources to Adelphi to address that problem, because clearly there's a concentration of the problem there. I don't think you can take a blanket approach and say, okay, we're going to use the same amount of money across the country if there's certain areas that have an increased number of suicides. So I think we need to be a little bit more, perhaps, and forgive me for using the term responsible, but we need to be more responsive to the data.
Very well. Now, I have another question here again. The last election was held on March 2nd, 2020. But due to a number of legal challenges in court by APNU/AFC, the victory did not come until August 2nd, 2020, 5 months after. Now, the question this person is asking, why did the AFC support such a challenge when they knew very well that APNU did not present the statement of polls?
Well, I think a couple of things we have to, let me give you my response. One, no country needs to wait that long for the results of an election. Every country must provide a legal recourse if one wants to challenge the election results. The methodology for challenging election results should not have countries held up for several months, but they should be able to have that addressed within a very quick period of time. In relation to you saying victory coming, I suppose that's a question of perspective, because victory depends on who you voted for, who you wanted to be in government. I believe that people are entitled to pursue whatever legal remedies are available to them. And so it wouldn't be for me to say that the persons who pursued the legal remedies that they thought would result in a decision in their favor were incorrect to do that. I was not involved in any of those election cases, but that's not the issue here. So I can't say to you, people should not challenge the results. There were several areas, I think, that were problematic with the elections, including the fact that people who were not in Guyana, people who were dead, people who were absent, ended up with ballots in that were made by them, or votes that they had cast in the ballot box. So Guyana, I think it's our national collective embarrassment. But close to 6 years after independence, we still can't solve the elections, which is awful. We need to have a very quick, sure path to election results. But that is easy to say. The reality with Guyana is that elections are life and death for the supporters of both parties. If your party does not prevail in an election in Guyana, you completely shut out. That's it. Your business supporters, you are completely shut out of participating in the economy. And in quite a few cases, a lot of people face unemployment. And that's an allegation that's made by both sides when they're out of power. So if the elections are so critical to your existence, then you can understand what the pressures are that lead to the results that we see.
Now, you are on the Committee of Constitutional Reform in Guyana.
Commission,
yes. Would you advocate for constituency voting instead of the proportional representation?
I'm not yet persuaded that constituency, first past the post, is the solution for Guyana. I don't. And I do hold the view that constituency voting runs very real risk of excluding large numbers of persons. And if you permit me to just give an example. In constituency voting, if you get 50% of the vote and your main competitor gets 49% of the vote, you get the entire seat to the exclusion of any voice from your competitor. That is okay if you're in a homogeneous society. We have done an exceedingly poor job of managing our race relations in this country, which have not overtones, which are driven by our political parties. And so you can end up with, as it happened in Trinidad with the COP, I can't remember what year that election was, they get 35 or 40% of the vote, but they get 6% of the seats. And that's a real danger, because if you've got a large constituency that believes that they are not adequately represented in Parliament, not only do you get the feeling of alienation and exclusion, if in a multiracial society there's a concentration of those numbers in a particular cultural or ethnic group, you then have real problems.
In 1992, the Carter Centers created a system adopted by GCOM, where you have 3 commissioners from the government, 3 from the opposition, with the chairperson breaking the tie one with the other. Now, since then, that's almost over 30 years ago. There have been no reform of GCOM, of this system, and it seemed to be a recipe for disaster, because nothing can be passed if the opposition don't want it, or if the government don't want it, unless the tie is broken by the chairperson. Do you think, GCOM, that we should overhaul that system and make it more plausible in the context of Guyanese?
So, Asquith, I'm happy you asked that question, because it's only in Guyana you would have a non-professional political election machinery. I mean, if you think about it, most other countries have a professional election machinery where they hire the best. The representatives on the board are people who are competent in their field. In Guyana, we pick government got to get half, the opposition get half. So you start off with an election machinery that is political.
Yeah.
It is difficult in a society which is as fractured as ours to expect anything other than something looking like a political decision coming out from the respective sides. So it is our national embarrassment that because of the huge distrust that we don't believe that we will ever be able to find people who are professional, insulated from the political pressures of the country to run an election. So we then resort to the next best, which is, okay, let me split this thing half and half. The government take half, the opposition take half, and we hopefully expect to have anything looking like a credible result coming out of that process. The way it's structured is bad, but I can't say to you that given where we are in terms of race relations in Guyana today, that it's not that we can't find professional people. Once you put up a professional Indian up there and you say, hey, this guy is going to be the CEO, the other half of the population will all automatically say, hey, no. And similarly, if you put up an African person up there, he's going to face the same thing. So you start off by eliminating from consideration anybody who is competent and capable, because 80 to 90% of the people who are competent and capable are not going to put themselves up for that level of abuse, ridicule, constant attack just for an election in Guyana. And when they finish, their reputation is in tatters anyway, not by virtue of justified comments, but by virtue of just the abuse that comes. So we start off by saying, look, purely by our approach, we've said to people, look, if you come, be prepared to do this. Now, I don't know how many people you're going to find who are capable of delivering that level of competency, who are going to volunteer for that work. So we start off by saying, hey, what we're going to get is second best, which is not to our advantage. And as much as this present system is, I think, completely inappropriate or wholly inappropriate for really dealing with the issues, given this very high level of distrust between all the actors, I am not sure what the alternative is at this particular point in time. Saying that I hope that we will get to a stage of maturity is like saying, one day, we're going to be able to get over the rainbow. But we have to address this. This is a real problem. If you have a political election machinery, then the result will always be viewed in a particular way.
I love your answers. They're short, sweet, and to the point, which allows me to ask you more questions than I bargained for. Now, do you believe in inclusive government?
Is the incentive then that I should take longer so I get less questions?
No, that's not what I'm saying. Do you believe in inclusive government? And if so, what type of inclusive government do you believe in, or the AFC believes in?
I'm unable to speak for the entire AFC because we haven't raised this subject for discussion. It's certainly on our agenda. So I forgive me if I don't purport to speak on behalf of the entire party. What I can say personally, the best thing for this country at this moment as an interim measure is a government of national unity. People say, well, if you get a government of national unity, you don't have an opposition. The reality is, with winner take all, you don't really have an opposition anyway, because the winner takes all, and you can do what you want. You can empty the National Resources Fund, and it's not a problem. So there's no point saying, oh, you don't have an opposition to raise points. The reality is, even when you have an operation in the winner take all position, the opposition has zero power. They don't have. It's not as if they have the ability to persuade the government to do anything.
Cool.
Where we are. So I certainly believe in the interim because of where we are historically, because of the good fortune we have in terms of the resources that are delivering significant revenues to the country, because of the political crisis, because of the racial tension. We need to be able to navigate the next 4 to 5 years collectively together with the appropriate constitutional safeguards for people who dissent, and in that process begin to put in place not only the institutions that will protect our wealth, but also will guarantee the sort of equal participation in the decision-making processes.
Guyana has, I think it's 10 municipalities with mayors.
Is it as high as 10? I know we have 10 regions. I don't know if we have 10 municipalities.
I think it's 10.
Probably,
but I stand corrected. It's 9 or 10. Now, as you know, mayors are now being paid a salary. They're given a stipend. And most mayors, even though they're working on this job full-time, they're considered part-time employees. That's why they're not given a salary. Would an AFC government implement a salary scale for mayors so that they can be on the job full-time in order to develop their municipalities in the country?
I would actually go further than that. If we are serious about our governance, MPs have to be paid more. They have to be given research assistance, because the only way you can seriously contribute to a debate on, let's say, the impact of lowering the gas price, increasing the gas price, is if serious research is done. You can't have a debate by rhetoric, which is what we have now. We get up and we abuse each other, and somewhere in between there's something that says, oh, the policy will result in 1%. MPs have to become full-time MPs. They have to be paid. They have to have research assistance so that we can begin to have the information that lends itself to having a real debate about issues and policies and matters that affect the country. Otherwise, all you're doing is instead of going to the culture center, you go to the National Assembly. And consequently, at a local government level, of course, if you want a better quality municipality, if you want a better quality councillor, you got to make it full time, and they have to deliver. And it cannot be centrally controlled by central government. The local municipalities have to be able to manage their own budgets, and they must have certainty and predictability. It can't be okay if the REO decides this is what has to be done, we get through, or you got to go and rub the minister's head in the hope that you get some sort of benefit. So I would not limit it to mayors. I certainly think if you want a better quality politician, generally, you got to pay for it. You got to give them the research. And if we are going forward and we are serious about development in this country, we have to give people the resources so that they could perform and so that we can remove them when they don't perform. Because you can't continue to say to the city council, oh my God, they got garbage throughout the city, but they don't have the budget. And that's a very simplistic approach. But what I'm saying is if you get what you pay for. And if you're playing peanuts, don't expect any level of high quality, non-rhetorical debate.
In a number of Caribbean countries, someone with dual citizenship or triple or whatever you call it can become a minister, can become a member of parliament, but they cannot become a prime minister or president. In Guyana, that's not the case, based on the Charandas Sagwa, what he did with the no confidence motion and so forth. Do you think that should be reversed and changed so that you can be having a dual citizenship and can still serve your country in the capacity of a minister and a member of parliament?
I think one of the things that is evident about Guyana is that there are more citizens of Guyana out of the country than there are in the country. That's a fact.
True.
Which means more of our talent is out of the country than it is in the country. When you add to that, up to recently, maybe 2-3 years ago, or before the commercial production of oil, that 80+% of the university graduates are leaving the country within 2 years of their qualifications, it means that a lot of the resources of the country that have skill and capacity are not here. So consequently, to say by virtue, and let me add this, most of the people that left Guyana really left for economic reasons, economic and political, but economic reasons. They just couldn't make it here, or the political oppression was too difficult, so they left. So if we really want to have a better quality politician, minister, leader, given where the demographics are in relation to Guyana, we should not be saying only because you stayed here and suffered, you are therefore entitled to lead. We can craft the appropriate legislation that allows us to harvest the best and allow the best of the Guyanese to lead the country, irrespective of whether they had to leave for political or economic reasons or, whether they're here. And we are losing sight of the fact that the demands on labor will lead to a large influx of non-Guyanese coming in to provide labor, skilled and semi-skilled labor, which means that there'll be more pressure on those Guyanese who are actually living here to the extent that they may end up being a minority. And if we don't have a robust migration policy which says, look, this is the criteria that you have to satisfy before you become eligible to become a Guyanese, you're going to have real problems. So we have to decide, first of all, what that criteria should be before you become Guyanese. Is 7 years enough, or should we be pushing that up to 10 or 15 years residency prior to being able to become a Guyanese? These are the sort of real discussions that are exceedingly important to the country that we should be having. But instead, we're down the line of racial tension and pointing fingers and what have you. So time will not wait on us, and we will be living with the consequences of it unless we intend to address it now.
In April of this year, their figures have indicated there are approximately 914,000 Guyanese living overseas, which adds to your point, there are more Guyanese overseas than those at home. Now, race has been a problem for this country for the longest while, going back to even pre-independence time, especially when it comes to voting. As you know, and this goes to everybody, no matter what they're telling me about crossover votes, we are a party of all nationalities and so forth. But the abundance of supporters that goes to the PNC, are Afro-Guyanese and Indo-Guyanese to the PEP. That is a fact. We can't dispute that. how would the AFC government or how would an AFC under your leadership try to ameliorate that problem?
Couple of things. I think I understand what you're saying, but you need to look at some other facts. In 2006, the Alliance for Change as a third party set a record in the Caribbean. It was the first third party to come in and get 5 seats. And I believe the reason for that was that the leadership at the time represented hope that the two races, finally, by the leaders they had a possibility of beginning to reconcile. By the time they rolled on to 2011, that increased, I think, by 1 or 2 seats. I can't remember what it is. There were some seats in dispute. If the Alliance for Change did not go into a coalition, it would have been interesting to see what votes the Alliance for Change got, because I do not believe that all their votes came from a particular demographic. What I will say and will concede that when there was an African leader in Mr. Trotman, the Alliance for Change pulled more votes from the PNC. And when there was an Indian leader with Mr. Ramjatan, with Mr. Moses Nagamutu coming over, I wouldn't necessarily say more Indian votes voted for the AFC. Some did come, but more Indian votes stayed home because they were dissatisfied with the performance of the People's Progressive Party. And that's a trend that is hopeful. What I believe is happening in Guyana at the same time is that we are indeed more racially polarized. And that racial polarization has led to an increased sense of, and it's very strange to say this in a time of plenty, an increased sense of hopelessness among certain parts of the population. And perhaps the Alliance for Change offers, if properly constituted, and if it is consistent in its positions on various issues of importance to the country, it offers an alternative of hope where none previously existed. And I believe it is that sort of information and the policies that reflect that the Alliance for Change will be pursuing under my hopeful persuasion to the other members of the Alliance for Change.
Mr. Hughes, you're a well-educated person, overly educated.
Please. No, I'm not.
Attorney at law.
And the only reason I'm stopping you, or not the only reason, one of the reasons I'm stopping you is because, used car salesmen start off by saying this is the fastest car on the planet, and it's not the fastest car. So I don't necessarily want to adopt that approach to your question.
But the fact is, anyway, you're well educated. You can't take that.
I'm as educated as any other graduate in this day and age. But don't get distracted by that.
At the top level of his practice. And on top of that, the nick and crannies of the country, and you're good at dealing with all the issues from what I'm hearing tonight. But be careful with this one. With an AFC...
If I need to be careful, then don't ask it.
I will ask, but I'm only giving you a caution. Would an AFC government or an AFC holding the balance of power push for renegotiation of the contract or a contract?
I want to be I've been very clear in this. Because the firm of Hughes, Fees and Stobie, of which I'm managing partner, and there are other partners in that firm, represents significant numbers of clients in the oil and gas industry, because there has been such a furor over the allegations of conflict of interest insofar as I am concerned, the Alliance for Change has set up a specific mechanism to address oil and gas issues, which is completely isolated and insulated from any interference by me. So in other words, I can't say to to Dr. Adams or Mr. Patterson or Dr. Ali, please consider X, Y, and Z. I have said I will not interfere, I will not participate, I will not recommend. For me to respond to that question tonight means I will be recommending, expressing a view to the body that I specifically established, or the party has specifically established, to deal with oil and gas. So I'm not avoiding the question. I'm specifically not responding to it because it would fly in the face of what we have established. And forgive me for being this strong about that.
Do you think that's a conflict of interest?
Do I think what is a conflict of interest?
That's you not dealing with the oil issue because your firm represents Exxon.
No, well, I'm happy that you've asked me that. You've afforded me that opportunity. And let me say this, and I just do it this way. Hughes Fields Stobie is 52 years old. It has been representing oil companies since my father was practicing in the 70s. Richard Fields was still alive. Robin Stobie, who is still with us, they have been representing. In the early 2000s, the current active partners, Mr. Pollard and myself, and it must have been in a moment of enlightenment, decided that we would start providing legal services to the oil and gas industry long before the discovery of oil, because we'd seen the patterns. We realized that what was going to come down the pipe. There are some clients, including Exxon, that Mr. Pollard manages exclusively, and there are others that I manage. When I was on another program, I think it was Dr. Heinz's program, I made it publicly known that the firm represents oil clients and that Exxon is a client of the firm. I am only in a position at the moment to influence the Alliance for Change and influence the Alliance for Change's policies on oil and gas. I can't influence the government. We all know the government's approach. Anyway, it's not as if the government invites the opposition for its views on oil and gas. So the only potential conflict that exists is whether I can influence the Alliance for Change's policies on oil and gas while I represent, or while the firm, represents Exxon. In order to address that specific issue, we have adopted the course I just said. We've set up an oil and gas committee. We've put good professionals on it. We're expanding that. They will deal with it. This is not an unprecedented situation. I think in your United States of America, one of your previous presidents, President Trump, who ran huge businesses, ran them up to the time of election, and then after the election, he passed them on. And coming closer to home, David Simmons in Barbados, headed a very successful law firm. He was leader of the Democratic Labour Party, and when he became prime minister, he relinquished ties with that. In Guyana, very, very eminent and prominent senior counsel, Mr. Ralph Ramkaran, Speaker of the House, ran for leadership of the People's Progressive Party and was a presidential candidate for the ANOG. I am sure that during that time, they represented oil and gas clients. And I have undertaken and said publicly, if and when elected, excuse me, I will relinquish all ties with Hughes, Fields, and Stobie. So I hope that addresses the question of conflict as you posed it.
Thanks. Very well put. Now, let me go back to your attorney at law profession. In recent times, you have tried most murder cases in Guyana.
No, I haven't.
No. I'm saying what the records are showing. I don't know what it says.
No, but I am correcting you on the records, but go ahead.
Okay, maybe the records are wrong, but I did some research on that, and that's what it's showing. And my question to you is this. Have you ever had a client who was accused or charged for murder, but deep down in your heart, based on what the client told you, the client was not involved, but was convicted?
Of course, I have represented people who I believe have been wrongfully convicted. Absolutely. I think most people at the criminal bar will say to you, particularly in the last 20 years, that there are several people they believe have been wrongfully convicted.
Well, my question to you as an attorney in Guyana, you know that there are a lot of cases now being overturned in the States, people being convicted, served 10, 15, 20, 30 years in prison. Don't you think you should have called in the Bar Association or the legal practitioners to let's set up a system to address these wrongdoings, go back, check DNA to see if these are those persons committed the crimes?
As much as we are well on the way to becoming, some people say, Little Dubai. We are still very third world in our institutions, in our structure, and our capacity. You referred very liberally just now to DNA. DNA is used partially in some paternity issues that we have in the courts.
Right.
The reality with Guyana is that, one, I don't think that we have the level of commitment to justice in my profession, and I include myself in that, that will result in those kinds of justice projects to ensure that the persons who have been wrongfully convicted can actually have an opportunity to have their conviction set aside other than through the appellate process. Two, the level of science that is used in the criminal justice system is so basic, is so backward, is so lacking in capacity. It means, therefore, that the verdicts that we get are driven by anything other than science. We are improving them. Judges are raising the bar every day by what they demand of the prosecution and of the police. But again, the quality of investigations in Guyana, again, are so poor, are so inadequate, insufficient, that in the process of bringing cases to court, a lot of important indicators, either of guilt or of innocence, are overlooked because we are also not equipping the investigators with the appropriate tools. I'm sure all of us look at, NYPD Special Victims Unit, blah, 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 and we see the level of technology there. That is not happening in Guyana. And as much as we are pelting forward with great developmental speed, we are not necessarily dragging the system forward as it should. Want to say, however, I have significant confidence in those that are currently administering the justice system, that they are taking it as fast as it can go. So we've seen a lot of improvements, and I think we will continue to see a lot of improvements, but we also have to make sure that we take the legal profession with it, and similarly, we take the public along with it. And the pressure that people like you bring, and the people who continue to advocate for a better Guyana, that hopefully will keep all of us on our toes so that we can only see improvements in the justice system.
Great answer. But here's a follow-up.
You're very kind.
Program because we started.
I thought we passed the end of the program. My watch says
we passed the end because but we started about 6-7 minutes late, so I'm taking back that 6 or 7 minutes. Sorry to keep you this long. Anyway, what would an AFC government or president use, or an AFC with the balance of power do to change a process that you call are very poor in the country, investigative and so forth?
Oh, we would need a very comprehensive overhaul of several things. We need the police, absolutely complete and absolute revamp in the Guyana Police Force at several levels, not just pay, but entrance requirements, technology. To increase the confidence in the results of an investigation, we have to spend an awful lot of money on science. A lot of the madness that is going on the road, you don't need anything other than cameras and an automatic system free from human intervention that leads from whatever image they pick up on the camera and leads to that ticket coming to you. And if you don't pay the ticket, it leads to an instruction for you to be arrested and brought to court and have your trial and disposed of. The more points of access for human intervention, the more difficulties there are. So maybe about 7-8 years ago, I actually visited Shanghai, and I actually visited the police nerve center in Shanghai. Shanghai is a city of 30 million people. They can, within 5 minutes, shut the entire city down and on facial recognition, identify any terrorist threat, anybody is involved in criminal activity. That is 30 million people in 5 minutes, my friend.
Yeah, I know.
They can shut that city down, pick you up, take you out, and isolate you. In Shanghai, and you know what we think our pejorative views are on being able to distinguish people. Why
okay, go ahead.
Why in a country the size of Guyana, in the capital city or in any of the highways, we cannot shut down, isolate, identify criminal activity with the most basic of improvements in technology? Why is that so difficult? It is because there's a lack of will, not because of a lack of capacity, complete and absolute absence of any commitment to do it. So people can drive down the road they want, overtake, turn in front of you, and feel no pain. The second people start to feel pain, that's it. It's going to stop automatically. A lot of Guyanese travel to New York up and down every single day. Those that drive in New York certainly don't drive the way they drive here. And it's because they know that there are consequences for your actions when you drive overseas. In Guyana, there are no consequences, or you feel that you can somehow persuade those responsible for the enforcement of law. Let the technology do it.
I'm the opposite of that. I drove worse in New York than I drive in Guyana.
Well, let me pick Miami, because I know Miami, and I've seen several of my friends drive in Miami, and it's not necessarily consistent with the way they drive in Guyana.
Okay, good. Now, your answers are so enlightened. They want to keep you here for another hour. But
that's where you start to go on to billable time.
I will not. But my final question to you, and I saved the best for last. Do you think corruption is rampant in Guyana? After that, you'll give me your closing remarks.
Is the Pope Catholic?
You say so.
Okay, got your answer.
No, I don't understand. Explain to the people.
Come on, is corruption rampant in Guyana? Are you seriously asking me that question?
You said the Pope is Catholic, so corruption is rampant. But to some people, the Pope is not Catholic.
As far as I know, the Pope is Catholic. He sits in Rome. At least that's the Pope I'm talking about. We're not talking about any other Pope that might be somewhere else. But the short answer to that, and that is a very easy question, of course corruption is rampant in Guyana. Absolutely. You can ask anybody that. They will say corruption is rampant in Guyana.
Okay, you have said it all. As I said, it was a delightful time to have you here. You will have to come back because I still have a number of questions to ask you. And the thing is, your answers are so to the point that you never actually step out of your boundary to give me long, unnecessary answers. You just answer them to the point, and that's what I like about your listeners.
I thank you for your very kind and gracious comments, sir.
Your closing remarks.
I really don't have. I first of all want to thank you for affording me an opportunity to speak to your listeners and viewers. What I would like to encourage all Guyanese, and I really do mean this, is that we are all collectively capable of doing better for Guyana. If we don't seriously address the challenges we face, we will not recognize our own country because we will no longer be in a position to make decisions about it that they're going to be made elsewhere. And I hope that we collectively, whatever our views are, we can become dedicated to making us all more worthy of our heritage.
My closing remark is that we need in Guyana a better internet system. You cannot speak long to someone for more than a minute before it disconnects itself and so forth, like the problems I was having here tonight. And it's not difficult to have a better internet system. It's very, very simple.
I don't know if you're being fair. I'm not sure which system you're using, but I know that there are some that are better than others. I don't want to get into that debate.
I know, but I tried all of them. And I traveled the country to Essequibo, Demerara, Borabis, and use all the different systems. And I'm having the same problem. I called people who got Digicel, who got GT&T, and it's the same thing.
You say you've left out e-networks. They're also in the same industry.
E-networks, all of them doing it. My friends got e-networks, and they're having the same problem.
Mm.
So,
well, you know, the market's you know, it's a market opportunity. Maybe a new company will see the opportunity to provide better service because clearly from what you're saying, there's a demand there for it. So it's another opportunity.
You know, in the States, I can travel any part, upstate New York, go to north, go to south, go to the 95, go any place. And I will got internet anywhere I go on the highways because they have these boxes up there, satellite boxes. Guyana can have the same thing. It's not expensive for the amount of money these networks are charging per month. Number two, I think we should increase. Go ahead.
The challenge with Guyana is the market size. It's part of the problem we have with banking. I mean, you know, people express a lot of frustration with banking, but the reality is the market's not large enough to have American banks come in. So there are other factors apart from the availability of the technology that leads to us getting the quality and level of service that we do.
That's why you need to bring more banks back home.
But forgive me for interrupting you. Please.
That's okay. The second, I want to see the retirement age increase from 55 to 62 at least. Follow the pattern of the rest of the Caribbean countries. We maintain 55. At 55, people have great experience, all the knowledge, and they just leave and go to another country and give it there. And last but not least, I would like to see the minimum wage increase, starting salary, at least $150,000 a month, based on the cost of living that we're having in Guyana right now.
My only question to you, if I could switch the roles for a minute,
right,
is what are the measures that you would put in place to address what is likely to be an even more pernicious inflationary consequence?
You know, I have a lot of economic friends who are economists, and they have told me, and I'll give you the reason just now, that increased salaries do not necessarily lead to inflation. I was in Sweden recently, and Sweden has, I think inflation is almost close to zero, but yet salaries have been increasing. So they increase the salaries, and inflation has not been rising with the inflation, with the rising salaries. So it's not a given that increased salaries.
I wasn't suggesting that it was. Sorry for interrupting you again. I wasn't suggesting that it was. But what I am saying is that Sweden is a far more sophisticated and has far more regulatory and market measures that address that. But I don't want to be interpreted as suggesting that.
I understand, but I can call other countries I've been to. Croatia, Hungary, is the same thing. Salaries have been increasing and they have little or no inflation. But I don't want to be labeled a point to call these countries. I know they're more developed than us and so forth. Well, not Croatia so much and so forth. But I'm saying to you, and well, to my listeners, an increase in salary does not necessarily will lead to an increase in inflation. Inflation will increase based on the demand and supply. That's what my economists are telling me. If they're wrong, then I'm wrong after them. Anyway, Mr. Hughes, thank you very much for being on the program. It was a very delightful night. I hope our listeners enjoyed this program. And I'm sure they did, because a number of them are asking me questions to ask you, but time does not permit me. And I hope that you'll come back at some time in the future. I have to get you back within the next 3 months, because I haven't, and by that time, you'll cement yourself more as an AFC leader, and you'll be able to tell me more of what's going on within the party and so forth, and the leadership role that you've just adopted there. So I know you're new in it now. There are a lot of things you'll have to learn, but I think you're experienced enough to know what you have to do and so forth. So thank you again. Thanks to all our listeners. Thanks to all our sponsors. Thanks to Mr. Noir Singh for making this program available. Devin Bissoon, Ryan Gobin, for our technical directors. Without them, we can't have a broadcast. And to you, Mr. Hughes, thank you very much for being on this program. You have created an atmosphere of delightfulness, of optimistic views, and everything else. And I don't think I've ever had someone like you who have answered all the questions.
I thank you for your very gracious
time
comment.
to divert and to move left or to move right and so forth. And I can see what our report or remarks are coming in already, that you can get a very positive rating on this program. I can see some of it coming in already.
I thank you. I thank you very much for affording me the opportunity, and I hope collectively we can all try and make Guyana a better place.
And I wish you good luck in your leadership role, but
thank you.
I don't know for the hell of me why you would leave your prominent attorney at law position to take up leadership of a party, but you ought to know,
Your comments are duly noted, sir.
I will not leave my professorship to take over anything because I love teaching and that's what I'll do. And that's it. But to each his own. That's a good saying.
Thank you,
thanks a lot. And I wish you the best of success in your new endeavor. And I know you're going to be successful because you're very, very astute. Thank you very much. You have all the acumen as a skillful politician. Not only a skillful lawyer, but a skillful politician.
I thank you, and I'm sure my parents, were they alive, would have been happy to have heard you. So thank you very much.
Thank you again. Thank you very much. Good night, everyone.